here at Rowdy Girl Sanctuary. And I'm here with my friend Erin. This is the first of hopefully many conversations with what I might call ordinary people, but still doing amazing, extraordinary things by just living as an example of compassion and kindness, and just being an example of what's possible in the world when we have compassion for all beings. With that being said, Erin, it is obvious that you are vegan. Can you tell me how long you've been vegan for?
So I have been vegan. I don't know the exact day. I just know that when I finally was like, I don't need anything from animals. I don't need cheese. I don't need eggs. I don't need dairy. That was in January 2021, like towards the beginning of that month. I don't have the exact date because I was almost at that point. Had been slowly cutting dairy out. Then I was like, why am I doing this slowly? Just I'm done with it. There's no reason for it. So yeah, that's when it happened.
So pretty recent
Mhm.
in the big picture.
Yep, for sure.
Oh. And you said you had already been slowly cutting things out before that point?
Yeah, so it was in 2017. I stopped eating meat.
Check her earrings. Meat is murder.
It is. Then from that point, I wasn't like very conscious of all the other things that came from animals. I wasn't conscious of the cruelty in eggs and dairy yet. I wasn't really reading labels to really think about everything. So I was still consuming those things, and I just became more and more aware.
Which is something that is very common, right? When we talk to people who might consider vegetarianism or themselves already be vegetarian, but they aren't aware of the cruelty involved in eggs and dairy, or even in meat, even though people consciously have an idea and can conceptually understand that animals have to be hurt for this. Mm-hmm. So they'll remove themselves from that one area of the process and not eat meat, but they'll still consume dairy and eggs, but being unaware of the whole process in general. So you were unaware, but how did you start to learn about what happened behind these industries? What made you change your mind?
I can't, like, there's not like one moment in particular, or I can't say it was really like one particular person. I think I honestly always knew it. I remember when I was probably like around 9 or 10 years old, I told my mom I didn't want to eat animals anymore. And she told me I had to because that's where I was getting my nutrition from. In the back of my head, I always knew it. I remember one time I asked my mom when she was making eggs for breakfast, how do we know the difference between the eggs that are going to turn into chickens and the eggs that we can eat? Like, I was really young then. I think I was maybe like 6 or 7. And she was like, well, they all turn into chickens. And I was just like, and it was just kind of, that was always in the back of my head. I don't know, but like most people, I just went on along with like what my family did, traditions, what my friends did. There were a few things, like I remember in particular, years and years ago, I was cooking chicken drumsticks, and I hate even thinking about it. I remember cutting into it to see if it was done, and it bled. And that was just like, wow, like what am I doing? But it still took more for me to finally get to that point. I think in the back of my head, it always disgusted me and made me sad. I just didn't acknowledge it. Like I was too scared to go against the norm, honestly. But the moment I decided I was going to stop eating meat, I remember it very clearly. I don't remember where we went, but my husband and I went out to dinner one night. And I'm looking at the menu and I'm seeing, all the dead animals that I could eat. And I just told my husband at that moment, I was like, I'm done eating meat. And he was just like, what? Like, because I hadn't really talked with him about this before. I had thought it for a while. And I thought about my cat that I had recently adopted, who I just adore, and in my mind, and that's what I told my husband, I was like, I love Harvey so much, and why does he deserve better than these other animals? And that was a moment I stopped eating meat, and then I just forced myself to become more and more aware. I watched the Fairlife, clips of it, the Fairlife dairy investigation, and then I was just like, okay, I'm done. And that's what really got to me. Yeah, it was rough.
I hate seeing the Fairlife label. I didn't know that because it's just like, to me, I'm like, you're hiding something, because why would you need to put Fairlife?
And it looked, like it's so happy and nice, and no.
So not the reality of what happens to those animals.
Exactly.
So that was the first thing you watched?
It was, and honestly, it's so crazy. So I met Morgan doing Anonymous for the Voiceless, is the first time I met her, and it wasn't really until it's like I already knew it, and so that's why I cut out these products. But then once I got involved with Anonymous for the Voiceless, and watched Dominion, and then that forced me to look into other documentaries I can watch, and also other documentaries that I wanted to tell other people about, because I really just want to open people's eyes. So I watched Earthlings, What the Health, Game Changers, The Best Speech You Will Ever Hear, Gary Yourofsky. All those things happened after I went vegan, which is kind of weird, but it just kind of fueled me more. I was just like, I'm right. Like, yes, I'm doing what I need to do.
I love that. I still get moments like that. Like, I've been vegan for 6 or 7 years now, and I still get moments where I'm listening to a speech or a talk or watching a video and just being like, I am so glad I'm on the other side of this. Because I think all of us ultimately eventually will get to that point where we realize it's just completely ridiculous what we're paying for and participating in. But there's so much to what you said that is so interesting, and I feel like relates to a lot of other people's stories too. Like, it's crazy and amazing that you remember those memories from when you were 6 or 7 and then 9 or 10, and just knowing inside of you fundamentally that something was wrong, and that I think so many of us we can relate to, but we shut it off. But it's so easy to see when you see a child. That child does not want to see an animal suffering.
Exactly.
And if an animal, someone innocent is hurting in front of that child, it's going to be upsetting and traumatizing. That child is not going to be hungry. So you don't even need to look into any research. You don't need to watch any documentaries. You just look at how a child responds to an animal being hurt and how they get scared and upset. That's all you need to know for how we fundamentally want to interact with animals and the compassion that we are just born with. And I had similar experiences too growing up, and so what do you think it takes for someone to, because I think probably all of us would have had an experience like that as a child, or at some point where we have to reckon with the ways that we treat animals in the world. But what does it take for someone to have that moment and then ultimately make the switch to align their actions with their values, what they feel is a right way to interact with the animals?
I think it takes like a few things. I think you, one, have to not be afraid to just truly acknowledge within yourself that you realize what you might have contributed to before, and it's okay that happened before. You cannot change the past, but you can do better now. Like, you have to give yourself that grace and not be angry with yourself. It's important to not be afraid to, like, be different than other people that you know. You know, most people aren't vegan. That's just the reality of our world today. But you can't be afraid to be like, well, I'm not vegan. I'm vegan. I'm not going to contribute to that. I think like the more I talk to people who aren't vegan, I think part of what it is also though is it's it's so huge. It's such a big part of our society, and it's so like consuming that when you realize the reality of it, it's overwhelming, and it gets very disheartening. And I think a lot of people simply don't want to acknowledge it because they don't want to be sad.
Yeah.
And like I get that. I mean, I'm vegan and I'm doing the best that I can, but I still like get waves, and then I have to remind myself I can only do what I can do, and I can be the voice for the animals, but I can't force anyone to change. And you just have to know that you're doing the best you can, and don't be afraid to be sad. Like, it's okay to be sad, but you have to channel that into being a voice for them and doing what you know is right. Like, channel it into positivity and doing something good. That's what works for me, because yeah, it's hard. It's not hard being vegan. It's hard dealing with the emotions sometimes.
100%. So true. In our group where we have a group chat and just a community where we do activism and talk things related to veganism, we really emphasize that we support one another, and that's another huge thing that is important to recognize. Is it's not hard to go vegan. It's not hard to go to the grocery store and instead of going like this, picking the milk that came from cows and it was stolen and it involved a lot of really cruel things that we don't agree with fundamentally, you just go like this and get the milk that was made from oats or almonds or rice. So that part is not hard, but the separation from like your current, the way that you identify and the way that you relate to the world, that part might be challenging for some people who really rely on that sense of community, that sense of support. So finding a support system, even just like a buddy as you go through it, and knowing that there are plenty of people, wherever you go, you can find a community of vegans. They might not be as active, there might not be as many vegan restaurants in every city as there are in Austin.
Right.
But you can definitely find people who align with the things that you align with, and who are willing to be different and go against the norm and live in a way that we fundamentally agree with. Yeah, that support is huge. So I think a lot of what you were saying is like, don't be afraid to be different, and it's important to remember throughout history all of the ways that people went against the norms of society related to different types of injustice, and those people were seen as outsiders, and ultimately they were standing on the right side of history. It wasn't that the whole society and the majority agreed with them and cheered them on. It was very much the opposite, but those people were shining the light and being the example of the type of world that's possible when you are not just blindly going along with the norms, because the norms are oftentimes dangerous and harmful, and they're only in place to benefit a few at the expense of many, and veganism is no exception to that. So what is maybe like one of the biggest takeaways that you've gained, or just a change in your life that you're thankful for after being vegan and maybe getting more into activism?
You know, our group that does local activism has been amazing and supportive. Like, we understand what we're going through. Everybody is in different circumstances and has a different life, but like, we all struggle in certain ways that are similar when it relates to veganism, and like, you know, maybe our family or our partners or something. You know, some people have vegan partners, some people don't, and everybody has a different story and deals with it in different ways, but it's just good to have like a sounding board and a support network. The biggest takeaway I would have to say though, like from meeting like-minded people, is I've actually gained my voice, and I'm not afraid to talk to people about animal rights. You know, I've learned that you can be blunt and honest but respectful. You don't have to be nasty and angry. And I've learned how to be very honest with like my family and things, and that's okay. Like, I'm not afraid to do that anymore. And I used to be afraid to do that. Like, I didn't want to say anything and I wanted to act like everything was okay. But that's doing a disservice to the animals. And I think we owe it to them. Like, the least we can do is speak up for them and not contribute to harming them, because they absolutely deserve that. So that's the biggest takeaway that I think I've gained, is there's nothing wrong with speaking up for what you truly believe in and doing what you know is right.
Totally. And there's this pressure, I think, from the outside to not speak up, because we, just by being this example, we are the mirror for other people for what they're paying for and participating in, and it makes people uncomfortable. And very much my situation, where I felt like I was doing something wrong for making people uncomfortable, but now I know that that is absolutely necessary and essential for things to change. And if I'm hurt by the reality of a cow who is going to slaughter, or a baby calf who just was torn away from their mother, or a pig or chicken or fish or any other animal who is being exploited and abused in the system, then I have to, like you said, channel that pain to do something that can relieve them in that situation, and hopefully not allow that to continue for many more animals down the line. And so, yeah, it's very prudent and important for us to remember that, and definitely, like, I love that you said that, to not be afraid to be sad, and like, we're going to be sad by the situation. It's a horrible reality, but if we want that to change, we have to keep bringing this to the light and educating people. And I think you agree with me, I think we share the same sentiment that almost everybody doesn't want this to happen, vegan or not. People don't want these animals to be suffering, and if they were actually faced with it, if they had the knife in their hand and had to slit the animal's throat, nobody would want to do it. Only out of necessity and in survival situations, which we're not in. We have access to phones and grocery stores and internet and cars. We don't have to kill and eat the animals to survive. We have many other options. So something that we don't want to do, we don't enjoy inflicting harm on other beings. So then it's up to us to spread that information and that reality of what's going on behind closed doors, so that people can start to live in a way that they actually agree with, which is not inflicting unnecessary harm and suffering on innocent animals.
And I think, like, speaking out for animals, like, being vocal for them as well, encourages other people to do so also, so other people know that they're not alone and they're not weird and they're not strange and they shouldn't have to feel bad about it. So, you know, if you're vegan and you're not vocal, like I was that way, I totally understand where you're coming from, but just know that that can encourage other people as well. You're not just sticking up for the animals, you're helping other people stick up for the animals when you do that.
That's so true. Yeah, we can end it there. That was great. Thanks for being vegan and being an advocate for
You
the animals.
too. Thank you so much, Morgan.
And look at her cool hat. Meat
Go
sucks.
vegan, everybody.
Go vegan.
You're blessed.
Yes.
Now you're going to be thinking, what are y'all doing? Taking us all around